The idea of work was once tethered to survival. Plow the field, hammer nails, sew fabric. If you didn't, nothing was produced. Labor equaled life. But somewhere along the assembly line, the equation changed. Now the machines do the hammering, robots do the stitching, and the fields are sprayed by drones that never sweat, never sleep, never ask for a lunch break. And yet we, the human cogs, are still told we need to grind for 40 hours a week. It's like a ritual nobody remembers the meaning of, but everybody's too afraid to stop practicing. 40 hours, roll it around in your brain for a minute. It's a fossil. It's a ghost dragged into the 21st century, demanding burnt offerings of time. That number was born in factories, under the fists of labor strikes, when people fought and bled to carve out a boundary against exploitation. But that was literally a century ago, when machines were still crude and labor was still necessary. Now, the machines are smarter than the bosses. Algorithms can build empires in the time it takes you to microwave your leftovers. So why do we still cling to the schedule? Why do we still pretend a full-time job is the measure of dignity? Maybe because the alternative terrifies those who profit most. Because if you admit that humans aren't needed in the same way, then the old tricks don't work anymore. You can't sell the whole bootstrap fairy tale. You can't dangle overtime pay like a carrot. You can't convince people that meaning is found in punching a clock. You'd have to face a bigger truth, that work, at least in its modern form, is obsolete. Think about it. Whole industries exist just to keep us busy. Paper pushing, pointless emails, check-in meetings that could have been a text. Whole skyscrapers of people faking productivity so someone else can feel like a manager. These aren't jobs. They're elaborate rituals of control. Bullshit jobs, as David Graeber called them. And people know it. You feel it in your bones when you're at a desk, staring at a spreadsheet that doesn't matter, moving numbers around like a child pushing peas around their dinner plate. But the system keeps demanding we run laps around a track with no finish line. Not because the work matters, but because obedience does. Corporations aren't afraid of unemployment. They're afraid of uselessness. A useless population can't be controlled with the promise of promotions and performance reviews. You can't guilt a crowd into punching in when the robots are already doing it better. And here's the paradox. If nobody's working, who buys the stuff? If the machines are making everything, who has money to spend on it? The snake starts eating its own tail. That's where the idea of a living wage comes in. Not charity, not a handout, but basically the next stage of survival. Because if you want to keep the capitalist wheel spinning, you can't just keep replacing the workers with code and then scold them for not working. At some point, you have to give them the means to live. Otherwise, the wheel breaks. No customers, no demand, game over. I mean, imagine walking into a store in the near future. Every shelf fully stocked. Every item shipped by autonomous trucks. Every product manufactured without a single human fingerprint. The only thing missing? People with money in their pockets. It's absurd. A perfect warehouse with no buyers. The silence of efficiency. The vacuum of progress. That's the dystopia nobody talks about. Not scarcity, but abundance with no access. And in that silence, you realize the truth. The economy doesn't need workers, it needs consumers. And if consumers can't work, then they need another way to survive. You can call it welfare, call it universal basic income. You can call it whatever you want. The label doesn't matter. The point is, survival can't be tied to a job that doesn't exist anymore. So the question becomes, what is human life for, if not just labor? That's the dangerous question. The one that makes executives sweat and politicians choke on sound bites. Because once you admit that survival shouldn't depend on wage slavery, then you open the door to something even scarier. Freedom. People with time. People with energy. People not chained to a desk. People wandering around thinking, creating, and questioning. Basically, a society of slackers with too much room in their heads. That's the nightmare. That's also the revolution. Because, let's get it clear, slack isn't laziness. Slack is sanity. Slack is the oxygen between the grind. It's the Saturday morning where you actually hear the birds. It's the long walk with no destination. It's the nap that turns into a dream, and the dream that turns into an idea, and the idea that turns into something entirely new. Slack is the fertile ground of art, of invention, of rebellion. Without slack, everything withers into routine. We've been told for decades that we're only valuable when we're productive, that leisure is sin, that downtime is waste, that unless your hours are monetized, you're a failure. But look around. The most groundbreaking things human ever created didn't come from the punch clock. They came from boredom, from daydreaming, from people staring at the ceiling until the ceiling cracked open and something wild poured out. You don't get jazz or punk or the internet itself from people too exhausted to think. You get it from Slack. Think about the cultural movements that shaped us. The beat poets weren't clocking in 9-to-5 jobs. They were riding buses, bumming cigarettes, scribbling in notebooks in diners at 3 a.m. Hippies of the 60s weren't lining up for quarterly reviews. They were lying in fields strumming guitars, inventing whole new ways of thinking about community. Even punk rock, our own Gen X gospel, was born out of Slack, out of kids with no money, no prospects, too much time, and a basement to make noise in. Slack has always been the birthplace of rebellion. And every time the system tries to pull it back into the grind, package it, sell it, and then tell us to get back to work. And, the future is coming, whether we're ready or not. Artificial intelligence, automation, self-replicating code. This isn't sci-fi. It's a normal Tuesday now. We already live in a world where one programmer can outproduce a factory of workers. And soon even the programmer is obsolete. The machine builds the machine that builds the machine. The question isn't whether work will change, it's whether we'll admit that it already has. And when we finally do admit it, the old narratives collapse. The Protestant work ethic becomes a punchline. The rags to riches myth dies in its sleep. The idea that your value is measured by your output becomes as ridiculous as judging a painting by its resale price 100 years later. The future doesn't need more laborers. It needs people who know how to live without being defined by labor. That's the new frontier. That's the revolution we're not prepared for. But here's the rub. Systems don't give up control willingly. They'll drag the corpse of the 40-hour work week as far as they can. They'll demand productivity reports from people whose jobs don't even exist. They'll sell you the illusion of hustle while the robots do the heavy lifting behind the curtain. And they'll make you feel guilty for wanting Slack. Like Slack is theft. Like Slack is indulgence. Like Slack is un-American. But it's not. Slack is survival in the age of obsolescence. Bring back the Slack isn't nostalgia, it's a necessity. It's the antidote to burnout in a world that doesn't need your sweat anymore. It's the only way to keep the wheel turning without crushing the people under it. So, picture this. A society where survival isn't contingent on a paycheck. Where technology builds the infrastructure and humans are free to build meaning. Not everyone will write novels or compose symphonies. Some will sit in parks and feed pigeons. Some will paint their garage walls with graffiti. Some will lie in the grass and just breathe. And that's okay. That's not a waste. That's life. Because the opposite isn't productivity, it's despair. A world where people are too broke to buy the very products the machines are turning out. A society where abundance exists, but it's locked behind the glass of outdated economics. That's the nightmare. That's the collapse. That's what happens if we don't bring back the Slack. Slack isn't optional anymore. Slack is the hinge the future swings on. Bring it back. Bring it back before the machine eats itself. Bring it back before we forget what life feels like outside the shift. Bring it back before the silence of efficiency becomes the silence of extinction. Bring back the Slack. This has been Slack Signal X.